What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Will Turby here for Demand the Truth. Even though we're wading through some technical difficulties right now, this is a very, very important interview. This is one of the most understated men of the 21st century. He has completely changed our lives. A lot of people know about him. There's some that don't. I want to get into that. But this dude is a journalist. He's an activist, the founder of Project PM. You've seen him in Vanity Fair. He's been featured prominently as well in many documentaries. Barrett, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show today. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, let's start it right off. You sent me some stuff that you wanted to cover first. It looks like Nicole Perloff was writing an article in the New York Times involving Jeremy Hammond. And for anybody that doesn't know Jeremy Hammond, just to give you a little background, I have a very diverse array of, although very small, of listeners in my audience. So if you could give people a little bit of background about who Jeremy Hammond is, because I'm sure some folks won't know.
Sure. Yeah, that's necessary for this anecdote as well. So Jeremy Hammond and I were de facto co-conspirators. We were not on the same federal case, but we both went to prison. We're both prosecuted over the Stratfor hack by Anonymous in 2011. Even though I'm not a hacker, he was, and even though neither of us instigated the hack, which it turns out was overseen by the FBI through a informant that they had secretly turned into a cooperator months before. It's a convoluted story, but it's also a simple story. The FBI orchestrated a crime and then prosecuted us for it. Now, that was already known to some degree back in March 2012, back when I was first raided by the FBI over Anonymous, over the research I was putting out on secret government programs, and when Jeremy Hammond was first arrested. That was already known because the FBI had bragged about the fact that their cooperator had been in play during this hack, during lots of hacks that the FBI let happen. And then a New York Times article came out about this issue, which was ongoing, in which was still being assessed back then by Nicole Perloff, for whom I had been a source. I dealt with lots and lots of press, especially back then, as someone who explained Anonymous, explained some of these dynamics, explained the intelligence contracting industry, various other subjects. And she wrote an article in which, in passing, she notes that, there's conspiracy theorists out there that think the FBI allowed this hack to happen. Again, even back then, before we knew almost anything about this, we know lots more now. The FBI had already made it clear that they allowed it to happen because it was known to the FBI before it was known to either of us who would later be prosecuted for it. They oversaw the entire thing. They had a 24-hour feed on Sabu's laptop, the cooperator. So it was a bizarre thing to say, and it came up again a few months ago when Hammond was, and this was something that a lot of people expected would happen, that I actually was surprised by. When Hammond was moved from his prison, sent to Virginia, and was coerced, and is still being coerced, into testifying to the grand jury, presumably in the WikiLeaks investigation. And this brought up a lot of this old stuff, some of these issues that had never really been covered sufficiently, that involve cases that are still ongoing, that are very much at the center of a lot of the things that have happened in the last 7 or 8 years, including the 2016 election. It's a huge story, beyond this part. Anyway, and Dale Cameron, who's and Dan Stuckey, both these guys, these are journalists who have actually done great work in unveiling what has actually happened, what conspiracies we can prove, what criminal conduct we can prove by the government in this, what, we got hit, all that stuff. They did a little article on Hammond after this happened a few months ago, after he was moved. It was announced he was being compelled to testify. And noted that, about the Stratfor hack, the background of this, to his case, my case, and noted that, Nicole Perloff at the New York Times had written this bizarre thing about how this is a conspiracy theory, this thing that is now proven beyond reasonable doubt and not even disputed by the FBI. And I was on my Twitter account, which I still had back then. I wasn't yet banned for the fourth time, as I recently was. I guess we'll mention that a bit. And I, mentioned, that was Nicole Perloff. Better luck next time, Nicole. I wrote that on Twitter. I wrote that in reply to Dale Cameron's piece, which was up on Gizmodo, I believe. And I got a DM from Nicole Perloff, and I posted all the screenshots of these after this. And she says, "Is that a threat?" And I said, "Is what a threat?" And she's like, "Better luck next time, Nicole." I'm like, "Is this the first time you've ever heard the phrase, oh, for fuck's sake, fucking spam callers?" Anyway, there's a landline here that people still have apparently, and all you do is you get phone calls from spammers and from political campaigns, reported messages. It's probably from Ted Cruz. So I'm not going to take that. So.
But you're talking about the DMs, and you said better luck next time.
Right. So, and I'm like, is this the first time you've ever heard the phrase "better luck next time"? The very common English trope, And she's like, well, look at the con, and it goes on and on. It gets crazier and crazier. And by the end of it, this exchange, and again, I was a source for her. I mean, I can go back and show the emails in which I gave her all this information back in the day. She admitted not being familiar with some of these subjects, which is fine. And by the end of this exchange, rather than admit, like, yeah, you know what, I fucked up. I was wrong back then. I jumped to a conclusion about a subject that I had no knowledge of, listened to the FBI and took them at their word. And as a result, a conspiracy against you and other people who were trying to show the public something very important was allowed to go forward. I'm responsible for part of that. I'm an idiot and I should resign. Instead of saying that, which surprisingly she did not, she decided that it would be more fun to claim that I was a hacker and that the reason I went to prison was because I was a hacker and that I hacked Stratfor. And that I tipped off the authorities to this hack. Now, it's a bizarre thing to say for anyone. I'm not even accused of being a hacker. I am denounced regularly by my friends for not knowing anything about computers, except for how to download mods for games. I use computers exclusively to rabble rouse and to agitate. I don't care about technology unless it can be used as a weapon. And so it's a bizarre thing to say for anybody. It was a bizarre thing to say that I tipped off the FBI to this hack, which the FBI knew of 2 weeks before I knew about, and which I, had no real role in technically. It's a particularly bizarre thing because she herself had written an article about my case, noting my role in Stratfor, which was not in a hacking role. And I'm pretty sure she noted somewhere that the FBI knew about this, not because I was told about it by an FBI cooperator who knew about it 2 weeks before I did, surprisingly, but rather because the FBI orchestrated it. I mean, it's such a bizarre thing, and she posted a tweet actually making the same claim about me. Then she deleted it like 20 seconds later. You can still see, there with it. I mean, this is New York Times. This has been reported there for at least 8 years. I think I forgot her exact title, but she does cyber issues, which are important.
Yeah, cyber journalist or something like that. Yeah.
And aside from being incompetent or making just mistakes out of negligence, she actively and just bizarrely and I mean rather dementedly retaliated against me for publicly referencing the fact that she had gotten something wrong. And that's the New York kind of conduct that people will be shocked when they see the extent of what I've collected over the last 10 years in my dealings with the press. I'll put it that way.
So interesting. You think the motivation is basically her? It's not coming from anywhere else?
No, it's careerism. Incompetence, ego. I mean, we are human beings. We were not designed to do things properly or morally. That is something that we have to pursue, via acts of will, by something inside us, that, some of us have more than others. Some of us have to work very hard at being good or not, not evil. And that explains, from my view, it always explains the most of what we see. But having said that, there is, of course, a great deal of knowledge we now have about, the frequency and the extent and the sometimes very baroque, hard to believe nature of what the government is able to do in retaliation, using the things around it, using the press, using, different institutions. So it's always very complex, and it's always something that we should be reluctant to make broad claims about or try to create broad principles about. Every single discrete incident has to be evaluated by the evidence, and that sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but it is something that the press has difficulty in implementing when they start talking about anything that is beyond the life experience of the average, boring, mediocre journalist, and that's unfortunate because most important things do go beyond that experience. The Epstein case, which is something I was talking about yesterday. When it was announced last night that the video footage of the first incident in which Epstein reported he was attacked, and his cellmate, former cop, claimed that he had actually tried to commit suicide, and that this former cop had rescued him. This disputed incident, that footage is gone, it's missing. DOJ did that yesterday. That doesn't prove anything, but it's obviously of import to anyone who wants to know about that case. And it's something that, if you look at the coverage, the Epstein thing, it doesn't interest me as much as it does some other people because there's so many other issues that I find to be more consequential. But what does interest me is the press dynamics, the failures of the press to look at a thing and evaluate something just as they would a historical incident or a mundane thing. These are all the same universe of human activity, of social interactions. There is nothing fundamentally different between a conspiracy among powerful men and a conspiracy among middle school girls. These are all the same dynamics, and it's only heuristics, it's only shortcuts by the mediocre that can cause one to look at one possibility as somehow supernatural, like akin to witches, and the other one as, of course, something that commonly happens. And this is something that I'm talking about because it keeps coming up in some of the issues that I think are most important if we are to have a democracy with informed consent over the next 20, 30 years, which I am increasingly pessimistic that we will.
Unfortunately, I think you're right with this rise of technology and just the continual rise of consumerism. I'm usually an unflinching optimist, but add that to what you're talking about when after 9/11, the lie about weapons of mass destruction and Osama bin Laden was used as a catalyst to place cameras everywhere in our society. But those cameras weren't there at the Pentagon. They weren't there when Lady Di. When Lady Di was in a car crash, 21 stopped simultaneously. They weren't there at the Boston bombing. They weren't there with Las Vegas. They weren't there with Epstein. So the government has this constant surveillance grid. They're always watching you. The NSA is on our phones right now watching us. But every time that we need them, they seem to be not there magically. But before we get to this Medium article that you wrote, you brought up Epstein. And it seems to me, I've been talking about this for a very long time, the fact that the elite themselves, whether it's the royal family of England, the royal family of the Netherlands, the Democrats, the Republicans, Hollywood, government science, we found out with Epstein, there is this link to pedophilia and pedophilia protectors. Also, and you talked about Assange. I wanted to get your take, I guess, in general about what's going on with Assange. He's being treated absolutely horrific. He's probably not even himself anymore. But he did also briefly retweet a few years ago now talking about the spirit cooking, talking about the Podesta emails with the underage kids. Does that all tie together to you? What would you say about elite pedophilia, and then also about what's the plight of Julian Assange right now?
So it's a couple of different issues there that I find interesting. So decadence among the powerful, among people who have exhausted other appetites, that is a historical, it's a fact of human experience. We don't know if the Emperor Tiberius really swam in a pool off the Isle of Capri with little children that he had collected and that he called his minnows. We don't know if that's true or if that was libel. But
you do know that Joe Biden was swimming with kids and they're playing with his leg hair. And that's where I know about the damn roaches.
Well, the thing is, Biden is senile or something. I mean, that was a bizarre anecdote. Even as setting aside allegations of pedophilia, that was I don't want that man as president if he can't tell an anecdote properly. That makes sense. I want you to be able to tell an anecdote if that's part of your job, but if that's your only job, even which it basically would be. But I mean, so we don't. But we must assess broad trends and specific incidents based on what we can think that we're pretty sure of. We always have to have a degree of agility and uncertainty, quietism, if you will, about what we do know, and we have to think in terms of probabilities. We have to think in terms of, is something that sounds outlandish? Does that mean anything? Does it matter if something sounds outlandish? Because the answer is no. This is a species that we're a part of. That for thousands of years we've had people successfully conspire to present themselves as actual gods to millions of people. We've had god kings thousands of years. We've had. It is not hard to deceive other human beings if one is more clever or if one has studied the various doctrines of stage magicians, of psychological warfare, the things that have been intensified in terms of how they're researched and what resources we can draw upon them, the things that happened during World War II that the Allies did to trick the enemy. These are all things that if one is not familiar with them, one has no business saying, oh, that's outlandish. And anyone who uses the term conspiracy theory as a pejorative has no right whatsoever to a place in the public conversation. It is someone who says that's a conspiracy theory as if that was an argument. Inevitably will not be able to define what a conspiracy theory is, will not be able to explain what is the difference between the things that I can point to the NSA admits to, has apologized for, brags about in some cases, the CIA, the things that even conventional people now agree to because they've seen other people agree to them, and they just sort of inherit things by osmosis in terms of what they believe. These are all things that it's easy to write off as like, oh, people are stupid. We have to start seeing those kind of logical fallacies as an enemy, as a military enemy, as something that is a threat, not just a threat, an active source of violence, an active aiding and abetting of atrocity. Atrocity begins with the conning or the or coercion, and both coercion and dishonesty they run together. To even accidentally, because one has decided that one's own opinions and the joy of thinking they're correct is more important than society's right to understand itself. That is it's a sin. It's a secular sin. It's something that we should stop abiding. And I think that aside from the structural things that we've seen in the last 10 years that have sometimes emerged to fight institutions, to put them back on their heel, to end or to ramp back state criminality, what's really important is that an ethos be inculcated, and that ethos be similar to what Roman Republicans felt about their duty, even though the Republicans of Rome, the Roman Republic was a criminal entity itself. There was a sense of duty there, a sense of civic virtue, the practice of mothers telling their sons to come back with their shields or on it, which I would have loved to have been told as a child. I had to develop that sense of duty myself, because we have baby boomer parents, and that's not how they think. That kind of ethos, it's what fuels a society. It's the operating system, if you will, of a civilization. It is vastly important, and if this is not changed, if that kind of sense of duty, of obligation, of sacrifice, of noblesse oblige, is not readopted in some form that's palatable and that's comprehensive and makes internal sense, we will lose. If we do it, we'll win.
You're right, and those that can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, and that's exactly what you're talking about. It's exactly what we've been seeing. Let's go right to this article. For those of you guys that are playing along at home, medium.com, here is the headline. Sentenced to 10 years, activist Marty Gottesfeld began writing about Bureau of Prisons corruption. Then he was shipped to a secretive new facility. His family hasn't heard from him since. This is very, very scary. Tell us about this article you wrote. You guys can find that at medium.com.
Yeah, so I've been in touch with his wife, Dana Gottesfeld, for the last couple of years, and she's had, I think she'll have more help pretty soon, but she's had to deal with a lot of this herself. The prison support and the legal, the ongoing battles that Marty Gottesfeld has fought ever since he was arrested for a protest DDoS against a hospital website of a hospital that was holding a young girl captive from her family and not treating her for a disease that she turned out to have, as other real doctors would later acknowledge. Rolling Stone did a great article on this, ironically, because they actually did a pretty bad article on me years ago, and have a history of just basic factual difficulties. But they did a very good article on this case that people should read, because otherwise some of this sounds like it's like maybe I'm leaving something out, like maybe he's not as good as it sounds. It really is one of those stories that is shocking even to me. And so the story of what's happened with Marty Gottesfeld, half of it is familiar. Half of it, the part about him writing, him challenging administration and being retaliated against, that's happened to everyone, every public figure, every whistleblower who's been in prison in the U.S. in the last 10 years. John Kiriakou, Jeffrey Sterling, myself, we've all been retaliated against for writing about BOP criminality. And so is Marty Gottesfeld. And he's also successfully brought things to court over his captors. In fact, Marty Gottesfeld is noted in this article at Medium, and it'll be up on Counterpunch also tomorrow, which is where I'm now going to be writing for the most part. He was at the same Manhattan prison where Jeffrey Epstein was held, and he has much as he can tell us about the individual guards there at the SHU unit. Things that the public wants to know now, and now they're learning how hard it is to learn the truth about the Bureau of Prisons because of the negligence that they have directed towards that issue, that massive issue of how the state deals with those it has captured and brought away from the fold. The unfamiliar part here, the part that's just surprising even to those of us who have spent years in federal prison and who have dealt with the FBI and seen unusual things, is this CMU situation. The fact that he has been held incommunicado for over 7 months, was shipped 9 months ago. There's so many aspects of this that I didn't have room to address in that article, and I'll get to my next column about this. But the BOP moved him right when he was in the middle of a court case against the BOP. And they shipped him, and that morning they sent him out to the court saying, well, now the venue has changed. He can't, this is the wrong jurisdiction because he's been moved. His last motion had been a motion to, I forget the terminology, but to prevent them from moving him while this is being decided. And they just moved him anyway because they know that they can violate a court order because they do it all the time and judges don't tend to care. Anyway, so that's a situation, just for reasons that are basically kind of haphazard, kind of scattered. Marty Gottesfeld has not gotten the same degree of media coverage and support that a lot of us have. Part of that is because, as always, there's every time one of us gets hit, there is a stage early on in which the press assesses it. And if they get things wrong in a way, the DOJ will have the advantage or the BOP and FBI have the advantage in getting wrong because they're the ones putting out the press releases. The other person is in jail all of a sudden, oftentimes having difficulty communicating. They'll have a chance to put out a false version of events. And in this case, it's usually, you'll see it headlines, you'll see him depicted as attacking a hospital. He didn't attack a hospital. He DDoS'd a website that a hospital used for marketing purposes. The hospital's operations were not disrupted. He did nothing whatsoever to hurt the ill. He was working to rescue a person he didn't know, who he did know was being tortured, essentially, in her own words. As she told her mom in a message she had to pass out through a little flower she made because her communication with her family was cut off. The situation gets worse and worse as one learns more about it, as with my case and so many of the other cases. And it also involved the same prosecutor and the same judge from the Aaron Schwartz case. That's a topic, that's the icing on the case there. And it's something that hopefully we'll be able to put back into the public sort of bloodstream in the coming weeks. Now this thing has gotten so bad.
Yeah, and I want the people at home to take this article. I'm going to put it in the description box right here. Get it out to everybody because, like you said, not only has his case, Marty's case, not gotten the proper attention that it deserves, but people like yourself are political prisoners for things that the FBI does. I've had John Kiriakou on my show. He didn't torture anybody. He didn't authorize torture, but he goes to jail. Not the people that tortured. Not the people.
He's the only one involved. Only one to go to prison for torture. The one who leaked it.
We got Snowden out in Russia. We got Julian Assange, like you said, Aaron Schwartz. It's absolutely crazy. And the problem is we only have people like Barrett out there. We need thousands more to, if not do the same thing, at least try to support this person and what's going on with Marty, because otherwise the people at the top are just going to continue to smoke their cigars in dimly lit rooms and run things. Now, you've done a lot of research. You've not only done a lot of research, I think, as Teddy Roosevelt said, you can be considered the man in the arena. You're in there, you got blood and dirt and sweat on your face. What does the hierarchy look for you? Because, you got the FBI, you got the CIA, you got all these alphabet letter agencies, you got the pedophilia going on, them attacking the righteous people. In your estimation, what does the hierarchy look like? Who runs things for you? Some people say, oh, it's the Bilderberg, oh, it's the Jews, it's the Vatican. Well, I'm sure it's more nuanced than that. What's your take on that?
Okay. Well, I think we can without even again, as always, we should remain cautious in trying to make any assertions as you're doing here, as you're being cautious, and acknowledging that we have to try to model this gradually. We have to try to we have to know what we don't know, to know the known unknowns, as Rumsfeld used to say in the course of a massive conspiracy that helped to facilitate. And we have to look to history to see what can we determine about what's happened before. How has this been arranged in the past? And we know that our forebears, as Europeans, our ancestors were under a massive cartel, an interlocking directorate of monarchs, who consciously or unconsciously, depending on the person, were overseeing a massive conspiracy. Sometimes to deceive the public, but mostly just to control them. Not to control them, just to live off them. And so there's different extensive imagination and scope when we're talking about people who are elite. Some people will envision, a new sort of empire. Some people are just sort of clock watchers. They were born to a powerful family or a rich family, and they married someone, and they're just sitting around, and they may believe that they are running things. and it may be the guy working under him, and it may be no one. I tend to see these things, again, it is very nuanced, and I tend to see it much as I do the press. I think it is ultimately something that was never designed. It was something that grew up just like we did, happenstance, via nature's laws, piecemeal. And so it's a constant struggle, as all things are, between different individuals who, in some cases, don't even know what they themselves are doing, don't even really consciously aren't even aware of why they're doing something. I mean, again, like when someone has a social interaction, they'll blink, they'll look away, they'll do all these little things that they aren't thinking of, don't intend to do. And when an individual is so uncohesive for the most part, we can hardly expect an institution to have more consciousness, more direction. And so living in the BOP, living in prisons was a great experience because I saw from the inside how a powerful institution works and how it doesn't work and how fractured it can be. There will never be, and probably never has been, any entity you can point to and say this entity controls the world and has a single vision. An entity will fracture. An entity will have factions. The factions may be over ideology, maybe over the allotment of power, jealousy. Some people are just bad scum, and I mean in this context, or they might want to disrupt, if there's a mass conspiracy of the Illuminati, there may be a guy in there who's like, I'm going to fuck this up just for fun, So, and that's how people are. And so that was true in Anonymous. It's true in a prison gang. It's true in a inchoate sort of activist movement. It's true in a bank. It's true on a board of directors, and it's true in it's true on the playground. It's all the same dynamic. So we don't have to know. I would like to know. I think we should know the structures of power and be able to visualize them and know that they're not always a flow chart. They're not always easily defined. But we should know about the dynamics, what we can prove about the past, and what we can thus hypothesize, and then choose a hypothesis that makes the most sense, but never choose it firmly. Never say this is the case. Say this is the most likely case, and we will remain agile, because to do otherwise, to decide I'm happy with my theory and I don't like to be challenged on it. It makes my neurons hurt, and it's to decide that you are more important than the right of civilization to survive and to be free. And again, it is something we should never tolerate. We should consider it the way people look at pedophilia, the way it fascinates, the way it discusses, that we should be applying that to the dynamics that kill millions of children in the end, because they're the same dynamics, and the things that are out in the open are often worse. I mean, this is a country that in my lifetime, since I was in third grade in 1990, my grandfather was in the Gulf War. Since that point, have caused the death and discussed it and admitted it and justified it. Madeleine Albright did that in the 90s during the sanctions against Iraq. Killed millions of Iraqis, killed millions of Arabs, with nothing to show for it, even if that were justification, even if they could, even if that would matter. And so there is so little that I hear that we may suspect or know about how the elite operates in their private house that matters as much as what the public has conspired to do, what the public has allowed to happen. And it's the public has to see themselves as guilty as well, and they have to start changing.
Yeah, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing. It's my most overused quote, but that's what happens when you don't make plans about life as a community, as an individual. There are people that are a lot richer than you. I love what you call them, clock watchers. They have nothing better to do, right? So they're going to plan that stuff for you.
That is an overused quote, but it's one that I do like anyway, even though I generally hate overused quotes because it's so important about men doing
it's
nothing.
Absolutely true. We can't just let Barrett out there and have him nailed up on the cross. We can't have these other great people going to jail. We can't have Julian Assange rotting away in prison. We need to stand up, because otherwise it's going to be you, and you're going to be pissed in that cell that nobody's out there helping you out. So,
because eventually I'm gonna get tired of this. I'll just join the Bilderbergers, if I don't feel appreciated. So yeah, absolutely, more people out there, taking responsibility as they can, after this, absolutely. It has to be it has to be a widely shared burden.
And that's the entire foundation of this country. People have forgotten that through the media, through education in Hollywood. Hopefully we're relearning that. I did want to ask you one more kind of trifold question here, too, and I appreciate you coming on and speaking with me. hopefully in the new year too, we can discuss a lot more topics because I have so many more questions and you're just a wealth of knowledge. And it's such an honor to speak to you because in a world where everybody just goes along to get along and does the right thing, and we're talking about these journalists who are just absurd. And you're like the last real. There's some really good journalists left, but you're part of the 5% of people on this world that are doing their job, which is ridiculous. You're just actually just doing your job. But what do you see the future looking like? We're at the most hyper-partisan time, at least in our lifetimes. I think I'm a year younger than you. We have, Trump, the Democrats. What do you see in the future? Activism, hacktivism, politics, and are you still pursuing the Pursuance Project?
Yeah, so broadly, I think these trends will intensify. Things will get more baroque, more complicated. The information warfare that has occurred among humanity since humanity learned to talk will continue, will intensify, will get more complex, more difficult to assess. It will be harder to know as technology improves among the intelligence contracting firms that we were at war with back in the anonymous days. It will be harder to know which company, which state may be deploying messaging via what appear to be actual people, using technologies like persona management. The national dialogue, the national information flow will be contaminated further and further. People will check out, tune out as they have been in some cases. In other cases, they will become more militant. And in this crisis, this existential crisis in which institutions lose their unearned authority, people like myself, adventurers, ideologues, visionaries, idealists, chumps, will step forward and they will take into that vacuum as they always do, and there will be conflicts over whose vision is going to prevail, and which of many visions will have what allotment of control. I think that unless we are able to develop and flesh out, and this is what Pursuance is intended to do, the Pursuance project that I initiated upon getting out of prison, unless we develop a number of different methods, competing methods, like Pursuance project should only be one of several over the next 10 years, methods of this, unless we develop strategies or protocols, frameworks for what we call process democracy, or distributed democracy that is it's not a mob, it's not a powerless talky talk session, but has actual protocols where everyone has equal ability to rise and to proffer ideas and to participate, but no one ends up being compelled to deal with anybody else. It's basically democracy by freedom of association rather than democracy by majority vote. Unless we are able to do that, implement it, and present it as a serious alternative, which is actually easier than I expected it was going to be because of the Trump administration, which came to power right when I got out of prison. It was very fortunate in a way, even because, as things decline, it makes it easier. We can do that, and then we will have the opportunity to put the nation states back on their heels. That's not just my opinion. Even the U.S. Marines back in 2010, I believe, 2009 actually, among the 4 major scenarios that they were starting to analyze for the future, one was exactly that, was non-state actors engaging in using non-nation state organization for a variety of ends, ranging from terrorism to liberation movements to reform, and that is what will happen. It will happen regardless of whether if I die tomorrow or if I play video games for the rest of my life. It will happen. I want to ensure that it happens first and best at the best method of this, which is hard to get into in details here, but the best method of this organizational method is created and implemented and pioneered by people who support what we call the open society, what Karl Popper called the open society. Societies that are freedom of speech ingrained, not just on a piece of paper, but in people's core beliefs, freedom of association, skepticism about state power, centralized power, skepticism about historicism, whether it be Marxism or fascism or anything else, skepticism about any ethos, any doctrine, a agility, the pluralism, as we used to call it. I use pluralism as a dirty word oftentimes because I think in the U.S., one of the things that have led us down this path is that we use it as an excuse to decide that a person who lives next door to us, who works in the Pentagon and is killed, is responsible for the deaths of thousands of people, We can hang out with them at a cocktail party and we can disagree. No, we cannot. That person deserves to die. When I speak like that, and when I talk about the future, when I talk about militant anarchist revolution, you have to remember that you remember, of course, but what people have to remember, they have to understand that I'm not saying let's instigate violence. I'm saying that the violence that exists right now has to be reduced. And just like in a war, whether it be World War II or whatever, the violence is ultimately reduced by violence applied against those who have started it and who will continue it unless they are dealt with. That will happen. There will be a low-intensity civil war in this country. It will take very unusual forms. It will be unlike anything much that we have seen in human history. It will happen gradually. It will be a while before we realize it's happening, and it will be hard to go back after that point. Just like it's hard to go back already to 2008. And that'll be repeated all over the world. And there will be a series. There will be decades in which these non-state entities, pursuances, as I call them, or process democracy units, will be in a state of conflict with nation states. They won't win immediately. They won't necessarily win for good ever. Nationalism will always exist. But there will come a time in which a state superpower treads carefully on some issues, because just like the COP, in 10 years in the U.S., they will come to fear what the information age ultimately means 30 years after we've had a chance to experiment with it.
Well, Barrett, thank you so much for your time. Very thought-provoking. I want everybody to check out all of your work. What's the best places for people to get in touch with you? I'll also put those in the description box too, so people can read your work, support you financially and otherwise.
Well, until yesterday, you could still read my tweets over at my girlfriend's Twitter account after mine was banned, but hers got banned last night. I haven't gotten around to posting screenshots of that yet. I threatened to dismember a person using nanobots who had claimed that they were kidnapped yesterday, doing a healing ritual. They came into this thread. Me and Alex Winter were posting stuff about Martin Gottesfield, and this fucking crazy person came, and I went along with it, and then the person announced that they were the diplomat plenipotentiary for the cosmic where the fuck, and that I had threatened to assassinate her, and that was a crime. And I guess Twitter agreed. Shut down my girlfriend's Twitter account, and so I'll try to get that rectified. But I go Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. Ironically, that is ironically my last refuge. I do write for Counterpunch these days. I've run out of other outlets that will still deal with me now that I've been more vocal about certain things in the last 10 years in the press that I've dealt with and alienated all my old colleagues. But Counterpunch, I'll be reviving my old prison column for them very soon, and I've got my book coming out, my memoirs in April from Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and we may very well pull off this thing where we have a movie coming out based on the memoirs that we're doing the screenplay of, me and Alex Winter, of Bill and Ted. And those old 80s movies, and he does very good documentaries on all of these issues as well, and works with this activist community, works with the information activist community. He's a great guy, very, very loyal, and really a one in a million person. We're working on the script, and we think we can get it produced, and that we can retain control and make sure that the movie that comes out is devastating in a way that a book can't. Devastating for the people, individual people who are still on an ongoing basis keeping the public in the dark over what happened in the last 10 years. We think we can ruin their lives and frighten others away from the same path.
Well, Barrett, you already have, quite frankly. I mean, we're talking about the overused quote, all it takes for evil triumph is for good men and women do nothing. Barrett Brown has been a wrecking ball to the system. I'm not kissing your ass. You, along with others, have literally changed the entire power dynamic of this world. And anybody else can do that too. You're not Superman that I know of. You're just a regular bright dude, right? And so people can have the success if they take action too. So we need people to do that. And what Barrett's talking about, I'm usually an optimist too, but we have the potential gun confiscation going on in Virginia, the boogaloo there, and I don't see really good prospects on either side, the Democrats or the Republicans, for 2020. I don't necessarily see either side saying, "Oh yeah, I accept this election," and it went down right. People are already talking about that. So we're living in dangerous times, and we need people to take nonviolent action to prevent this violence that's going to occur. Barrett, thank you so much. I'm going to make sure you put all your links down here, and hopefully I can have you back on in the new year, talk about your book. And if you ever need an outlet, I've got 13 people ready to watch for you, Barrett.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let me just say one more thing. One of the reasons people oftentimes don't get involved is they just can't imagine what role they could play. And I just want to say that do come and check me out on Facebook because there's a number of things we're starting now involving media reform, involving pointing out the full extent of just the everyday failures of the press to keep us informed. And that's something that you can, anyone who is clever and has a little bit of time in the week can do as they will, no commitments that they can help with and have devastating effects on people who have gotten away with too much for too long. And I'll explain it all there. You can see that I've done some speeches at Niagara University and other places in Goldsmiths in London in the last few years. You can see on YouTube, in which this is all explained as well. But it's Operation Hastings. We're calling it that, media reform. And we have some other things in the works, again, that are very easy to participate in, that are entirely legal, that are based on the latest information operations or strategies we'll be able to figure out. And some are actually not very imaginative at all. Some of them are very old techniques for establishing a better world around us, taking responsibility for the world. But thanks again very much for having me on.
It's my pleasure. And if anybody wants to get involved, you can just inbox me on any way. And hey, look, some people are musically talented. John Lennon, Bob Marley, they changed the word musically. There's artists that do this. You can make a meme. You don't even have to show your face. There's 1,000 ways. And if you don't know, get in contact with me or maybe Barrett. I'm sure he'll be able to help you, put you in the right direction. But we need to do something. We need to take responsibility for this world that we're living in. Barrett, thank you so much. It's a very big honor to have you on. And I'm going to share this video far and wide. So hopefully we can reach that critical mass and we won't ever have to talk to each other again, at least about this stuff. We can talk about more fun things in the future.
We probably will. We'll have to. But one last thing. The Persians used to say that a child's education should be to shoot a bow, to ride a horse, and to speak the truth. If you can do any of those three things, then we have a place for you in this movement.
Awesome. Barrett, you are a legend. It's an honor to talk to you. You have a great day. Thank you for making time for me, brother.
Thank you. Thank you very much.